Welcome, everyone. On this Pisces full moon, I would like to speak about compassion from perhaps an unexpected perspective. This is the third episode of this series, River of Stars Currents, Timeless Wisdom Through Astrology and How to Lead Better Lives. This is, of course, part of the educational program that I invite everyone to join because it's not only about learning astrology, it's a way of life. And as we study this sacred knowledge, we change our lives and we can also help humanity one by one better understand themselves and their role in this universe. So, soul work is a commitment, and I hope this inspires you to go as deep as possible and to give it your best to go as deep as you can. Some of these themes that I will be talking about are part of the uh, content of the book I wrote on Neptune, the 12th house in Pisces, which has everything to do with our existential being, with the understanding why we're here and understanding the challenge of incarnation. Incarnation thrusts us into survival struggle, sometimes at the expense of forgetting our spiritual origins. When becoming conscious on a spiritual path, we long for reconnecting with what is all encompassing, the truth that is beyond duality, fragmentation, separation. So we are born, incarnating, and forced really into being separate beings. I'm going to unpack all this. The question that comes up is whether returning to spirit is really the main evolutionary purpose, or whether there's more to the reasons, the purpose for our incarnation. What is the greatest spiritual exercise? Maybe it is to be here and not just to return to the source, but to do it in the most integrated way, to be in time and space, understand its role, why we're here in the first place, because it's difficult. This descent into matter is very stressful. So we are here, we're descending into form, but we remember, we remain inspired by the spiritual identity. And so as we are in form, we have to reconnect, to ascend to the higher, finer, all encompassing spiritual reality that exists beyond duality. And yet, most spiritual practices inspire us to transcend the earthly plane as it is perceived temporary, limited, profane. And we know that being here means that we face a lot of suffering. Most of our prophets and sage and great spiritual teachers speak about ways to overcome suffering, ways to become free from the material plane, because the material plane is limited. But on the other hand, we need to ask ourselves, so why did we come here? Is it a punishment? Is it a mistake? Is it to remind us, where we're coming from? We need to ask those deeper questions, because while we are encouraged to embrace what is beyond duality, what is beyond time and space, what is beyond the ego, we need to understand that we didn't ask for an ego. We did not create time and space. So why is it there in the first place? So returning to spirit may, risks being a shortcut. And we need to better understand why the duress of incarnation. It would be easier to just go back to spirit. When we speak about unconditional love, about unity and living beyond duality, well, yeah, give it to me. What am I doing here? Why do I need to be separate from that? So this aspiration to return to spirit must be taken into a greater context to understand that, yes, we all wish we could return to spirit. Life is much easier without an ego. Life is much easier without duality, without separation, without time and space. But why is it here? Why are we here? So many of us struggle with the descent, and we find coping mechanisms because in the descent we are separated. Just like a baby separates from the womb of the mother, we become autonomous beings, and then we are thrusted into this existence. And we need to compete, we need to fight, and we risk a lot of suffering, death, as we continue our journey. So we find coping mechanisms. When you face suffering, the one thing we want to do is to numb our pain. I mean, how long can you listen to stories of baby animals being eaten by predators, or injustice because an oppressor is crushing a minority, or vulnerable people being subjected to ill treatment? Whatever it is, whether it's in nature, whether it is part of human existence, we are confronted with so many difficulties, emotional, physical, spiritual. And so we need to find numbing mechanisms. Otherwise, we would be completely overwhelmed all the time. Some people choose to try to go back to spirit by ingesting spirits, by abusing alcohol or drugs, or any kind of agent which will, again, blur the senses and enhance our ability to tap into something more magical, more transcendental, and obviously to overcome pain and suffering. Then, even in our spiritual journey, how many of us are spiritually bypassing when we want the shortcuts? We speak about love and unconditional love, but then we feel frustrated when we have to wait for an agent, for a customer service. And so this dichotomy between the all-encompassing higher truth, spiritual unity, transcendence of duality, versus day to day, having to eat, self-maintenance, and having to go through the friction of material existence. So perhaps the spiritual exercise is to learn to be in the material world in a way that's healthy, integrated, to bring heaven down to earth rather than escape earth to go to heaven, so to speak. So the big challenge is the descent from spirit to matter. And you have different spiritual system, religion, prophetic truths, scriptures, who will try to explain how to cope with this and try to explain quite often how to remember our spiritual identities while we are here in the descent. So the focus is usually on ascension, on rising, on elevating rather than coming down. When I wrote in the book that we, for each of the Neptune placements in each house and sign, I wrote a paragraph about where is it we learn to forgive God. And most of us learn that we should ask for forgiveness for our sins, for our trespassing, for our ignorance. So what does that mean that we need to forgive God? In some ways, forgiving God means that we did not ask to leave spirit. We were projected. There is a thrust of incarnation that take us from the all-encompassing, the eternity, into time and space and death and rebirth. So forgiving God has everything to do with understanding our frustration, understanding our grief, that we've been separated from the divine womb of the universe. And it means also that we're accepting the challenge of incarnation, that we better understand why we're here. And we're not trying to find shortcuts or way out of here through numbing, abuse of substances, or spiritual bypassing, or whatever means to escape. Forgive God that you had to be born and separate from the divine oneness in order to develop your personal consciousness. Accept that you must develop an ego and therefore must proceed through life alone, forging your way forward by virtue of your own efforts. Accept that life is a battle and that you will face challenges, adversity, and errors, and must take action to win the day and conquer your existence. Forgive God that life is not about you and that after you die, life will proceed as usual. Realize that it is a privilege to be part of life, which means to have descended into incarnation, and that your existence is an offering to yourself. Be sure to make good use of this offering and the opportunity to be born. Accept that even though life is good, it is fraught with traps and challenges that are bound to cause pain. Accept these challenges. Accept the fact that your true purpose is to be still and to do something about it. What I mean by that is that we learn to find peace in the eye of a storm rather than to find peace in a place where nothing happens. So living in the thick of survival struggles, of life as a whole, is the spiritual challenge. And why did we descend? In order to develop our consciousness. So astrologically, this is represented by our ascendant, the eastern horizon. On the one hand, on the one side of the ascendant, you have the 12th house. On the other side, you have the first house. And depending whether you go clockwise or counterclockwise, there is a motion, an evolution through these phases. In the 12th house, we are in the universal womb, in the divine consciousness. And in that place that is beyond time and space, which means a place that is beyond duality. And there is no me or you. There is no here and there. There is no now and later. All is everywhere, everything, always. The moment you have time and space, everything is fragmented into segments, one fragment, another fragment, like the frames of a movie. When you look at a film, you see one frame, another frame, another frame. Everything is separated to create a full story. But in the womb of the universe, we experience everything, everywhere, with everyone, always. We are one. All the water signs represent that place of vulnerability, that place of being bare, being yourself. And the 12th house begins with the universal womb, where we don't even exist, but are just part of life. What unites us all, whether we are a tree, whether we are a flower, a human, an animal, a rock, a mineral, what unites us is that we are all life force. That's the fundamental unifying principle. Cancer in the 4th house represents the personal womb, the womb of our own mother. And that's the great difference between Cancer and Pisces, is that Cancer has a biological family, and we protect our own family. We raise our own children, and we care for them until they're adults. Pisces is the universal family, where we are all one, and there is no neighbor but ourselves. We are everything. So family, the concept of family, is universal. And Scorpio is kind of the bridge between the personal and the impersonal, between the Cancer and the Pisces principle. As Scorpio brings into that intimate sphere, into that vulnerable space, other beings. This is the fundamental connection of sexuality. Through sexuality, we take our defenses down and we merge two into one. So it serves as a bridge between the self and the collective. On the other side of the ascendant is Aries, and that is the 1st house, where we are born from the universal womb into time and space existence, where we develop our autonomy. Just like a baby, if we compare this to our own current birth, our own current incarnation, When we were in the womb, everything was taken care for us. We were in a passive state of being. And we felt safe. We felt that we could completely trust our parent who would nourish us, provide the right temperature, provide the right nutrient, and make sure that everything's going fine. We don't need to worry about the rent when we are in the womb. But as soon as we are descending, think about the birthing process, descending into incarnation, into form, then the first effort of pushing, the first effort into being and separating from the womb into an autonomous life force is basically an immense struggle, because on the one hand we can feel liberated to be our own, but on the other hand it means that we are now in a reality of separation where we have to take care of ourselves. We need to learn to walk. We need to learn to speak. In the womb, everything was understood. There was no need to explain. There was no need to go anywhere. Suddenly, as we are separated, we enter the realm of fragments, the realm of separation, and we are subjected to a lot of challenges where our existence is suddenly conditioned by our efforts, that if we don't become strong, if we don't learn about our existence, we risk discomfort, pain, suffering, or death. Life begins as a struggle. If we don't take action right away, we risk being overtaken, overpowered by another entity. So the first house has to do with developing your willpower, developing your purpose, you igniting your consciousness. It's a fire principle, and the fire has to do with ignition. But what are you igniting? You're igniting your consciousness, which means this is the preliminary stage of having an ego. And as you develop your ego, you start to, second house, find resources to nourish you. The struggle of having to eat every day in order to survive. So you need fuel, you need to refuel, and you need to learn how to get food. In the womb, everything is provided. The sun rises every morning to give you light. There is air that is freely available to provide oxygen for you to breathe. You have water available falling from the sky, and you have soil that produces nutrients, food for you. So why is it a struggle? Because even though food is available, you need to work in order to get to it. And this is, the first challenge of existence is to have resources available. So the baby will first of all nurse and then have the mother provide milk with nutrients. But soon enough, as we develop more and more autonomy, we become agents who will need to find our own source of fuel. So the second house is that struggle to use the resources in ways that work. It's one thing to find a resource. It's another thing to know how to cook it, to peel the layers of the fruit, to grow your own vegetables. And so in the beginning, you have the hunter-gatherer who went and migrated with wherever the source of food was available. And they had to take care of wintertime. So it's not only about, the day to day, where is our next meal going to come from? But it's also developing the strategy to think ahead when there is no food available, how to store it, how to make sure that we have supplies. All that is part of the Taurus principle. And then Gemini has to do with figuring things out. When is the sun setting? When is winter coming? How tall this tree is going to get? How long does it take for a human being to become strong enough and mature? So all the data, all the information about how to live life functionally, properly. And so in that first quadrant, we are forced into these struggles of survival and making sure that we don't die. Basically, it's what Darwin will refer to as natural selection. Those who don't wake up, who don't ignite their willpower, who don't try to figure things out, who don't think about food supplies, are fading out, because in nature, nothing is wasted, which means that the moment you see a little kitten is not going to find the nipple, the other kittens will take all the milk. And that kitten will be pushed aside and eventually weaken. And in that weakness, other entities, parasites, will take over and basically consume its life force. So from a universal point of view, life force is life force. If you don't use your life force, if you don't develop your own will, someone else will use your life force and you will fade into non-existence, and you will be recycled through other organisms who will eat you, consume you. The same way composting happens. So you see the opposite of Taurus is Scorpio, death. If you don't sustain yourself, you die, but then you help sustain someone else. You become someone else's meal. So death serves life. In the second quadrant, we develop our ego. That's when we become the self. We find our space. We find our home. We know what our purposes are. And we start to develop the actual autonomy to not only survive, but to stabilize, so that we can start to have a routine. We can start to figure things out and not have to wonder every moment, if the sky's going to fall on our head, if we're going to have enough food or water or enough oxygen. So the second quadrant is stabilizing, but also that's when we develop our creativity. So we start to not only establish ourselves, but also to enhance, develop, and establish our existence. So we take charge of our own destiny. And it completes with a sign of Virgo, which has to do with the routine to lead our lives. We're going to go to sleep at some hour, we're going to wake up, and then we're going to go hunting, and then we're going to go planting, and we're going to have all these activities that guarantee and secure our being. And so life is a little safer this way. We are more aware of the challenges, the stresses, the risks, and the danger, and more prepared. In the third phase is when we now start to think about how to get stronger, because even though we have a routine, we're not prepared to all the dangers. We need to get stronger because new challenges are coming. There's so much we can grow on our own. Maybe we can also get supplies from what other people are producing, creating. So we start to exchange, we start to collaborate. And union here, one-on-one union, starts to make sense to make us stronger. And so there's a greater risk to get out of our comfort zone and to expand our territory, expand our reach. This is why it's a growth-related quarter. And so we're continuing that descent from spirit into matter, into existence, and stabilizing ourselves. And through Scorpio, we go through the temptation to grow, the incentive to become stronger, more powerful, to basically make sure that we are prepared for greater challenges, greater storms, greater resources. But at the same time, there's a risk of loss. There's a risk of basically being, killed or losing our crops or being overpowered, being deceived by someone we wanted to connect with, to form an alliance with. So through Scorpio, we go down into the shadows to find our deepest vulnerabilities, our deepest insecurities, because we realize through that we have exhausted our resources, and that if we don't make a change, we will die. If we don't reach out, we will die. So we are at the bottom of the barrel, descent into the underworld. And we go as down, as deep as possible. But this is why Pluto rules the sign of Scorpio. And I don't care if you're a traditional astrologer or no, this is part of the dynamic of Pluto, regeneration, where Pluto will reignite your Mars so that you can have another new supply of energy to support you for the next phase. So Pluto is the gateway to the transpersonal. This is where, from the bottom of the barrel, from the absolute descent into matter, you reach rock bottom. And then the way from there is back up. So this is where the ascension begins again. So you descended through Aries, through the birth canal, into the material world of Taurus, and needing to feed yourself and needing to figure things out and find your home and until you get to the limitations of how far you can go on your own, how far you can go with what you have, and the need to now transform yourself and understand that there is a higher reality. And if you don't get that higher reality, you won't survive. So Scorpio is about going as down in the descent as you need to go, and from there starting to rise up again. So the gateway into the transpersonal, the gateway into the spiritual realm, which is now accessed through Sagittarius. And Sagittarius makes you understand that there is more to life than the material world. That we're not just here to survive, to reproduce, and to poop. That there is a greater all-encompassing truth. As a mutable sign, it basically connects us to a unifying principle, that all life forces are connected in one way or another. So Sagittarius makes us understand that there is more to life than what's in front of us, than meets the eye. There is an abstract spiritual reality that governs us. And then through Saturn, we learn that life is not just about our own willpower. It's not just about what we want, but it's also about a higher order, a higher spiritual principle. This is where free will turns to fate. So the last vestige of our free will, where we understand what we want and how we can get it, is in Sagittarius. Once we enter the last quadrant, we realize life is not just about us. It's about the whole. It's about the unifying principle of life, the truth that is eternal. So Saturn is the gateway to understand that there is something higher than ourselves, and that there is a higher authority, and there is some kind of hierarchy. The same way a mentor will lead and prepare an apprentice, the same way a parent will protect and guide their children, the same way a teacher will teach their students. So there is principles that we all need to learn, principles of living well. And this is why Saturn is so harsh, because Saturn tells us it's not about what you want. It's not about wishful thinking. It's about a higher truth. And if you align yourself with your spine, you can root the earth with the crown and connect heaven and earth. So the whole principle of alignment is a Saturnian principle that basically means you can be here in the material world, but connect to a higher spiritual intelligence. Aquarius represents our ability to understand the higher intelligence, the science of all the mysteries of life. Through Aquarius, we learn why the sun is rising every morning and how it's doing it, and that there is a solar system and a galaxy and vibrational powers and gravitational powers. So we kind of figure the mysteries of the divine. We put names and labels and see how the process works. So we become intelligently educated into how life functions. We develop the science. And the more we know, the more we understand, the better we can proceed, the better decisions we can make. But it's still about understanding the complexity of all life forms and all the layers. And of course, it never ends. The learning continues. And then through the 12th house in Pisces, we return to this collective identity, to the collective consciousness that taps us into the truth that connects everything and everyone, the trees and the rocks and the beings and the animals, and even whatever is beyond Earth into the galaxies, how everything is sourced in the same intelligence, governed by the same intelligence. So it's the unifying principle that, of course, takes us beyond the self. So from Aries, from the first house to the 8th house to Scorpio, we were in the development of self, the growth of self, the descent into self. And then from Scorpio, we go through this change of direction and from descending, we reclaim our spiritual awareness and we become ascending again. The phoenix from the flames. And our story of ascension expands into Sagittarius, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, the ultimate. So we realize that life requires this descent, ascension interplay. And as I said, most of our spiritual systems will glorify the ascension, be more Jupiterian, Saturnian, be more disciplined, renounce material pleasures. Don't attach yourself to possessions or to immediate gratification. Renounce earthly pleasures, sexual pleasures, to dedicate yourself to spirit. And you have, the prophets who tell us that it doesn't matter how much we suffer in the physical form, because it's not what life's about, is not the physical form. So if somebody slaps you on the cheek, give the other cheek, because you're going to be rewarded in the spirit, in the spiritual world, in the kingdom of heaven. So it's all about life on this dimension is not what it's about. You need to rejoice because you will be rewarded in the kingdom of heaven. And that is not just in Christianity. You find this in Islam as well, where the concept of sacrificing yourself and suffering and even killing yourself for a greater cause, the jihad, will reward you with many presents once you reach God and heaven. So my question is, but why did we come here if it's just to get slapped or to renounce the pleasures? Yes, it is obvious that the descent involves suffering because we are at the risk of extinction, the risk of being overpowered, the risk of being eaten. But let's try to understand that there is a spiritual meaning to the descent. And obviously realize that this has everything to do also with the male-female principle. The female, we descended into incarnation through our mother. Literally, through the womb is a descent. And the ascension, is represented by the male principle. So you understand also why there's such a glorification of the ascension rather than the descent, because women have been punished for representing the descent. Women are perceived as the cause that has ruptured us from the divine. And just like a phallic symbol, like a space shift into the universe, we are ascending through the male principle. Of course, it is not black and white. There is always feminine in the masculine and masculine with the feminine. But as a general direction, there is a lot in that represents the inequality of gender, because we are so, there is a spiritual war against the descent. And there is a spiritual war against Taurus, against the physical. Every spiritual system pretty much is teaching us to overcome our attachment to the material. To not even to not eat, to become a breatharian, to not have to consume solid food, to not be possessed by our sexual lust. And so what ends up happening is, I've often mentioned in several videos, is that we split spirit from matter, and we end up having matter without spirit and spirit without matter. So if you want to be spiritual, you need to go in a monastery and, isolate from the mundane. And if you are in the mundane, then you become consumed by your appetite and your gluttony and your excesses, and you binge. So there's the extreme of austerity, of how you renounce the Torahs, the pleasures, or how you overindulge, and you become obese, and you become a sexual addict, and you basically are consumed by your appetite. So none of this works. At the end of the day, the balance between descent and ascension needs to be established. And remember that we're talking about compassion. This is the topic of our presentation today. In the universal womb, in the spiritual womb, in this place of oneness, there is no danger because there is no separation. There is no friction. There is no danger. There is no need to protect yourself. In the universal womb, you are immortal because life force is life force. But then you are born into being, and this little turtle hatching the egg will never see their mother. She is autonomous from day one. And she needs to figure things out and to go and reach the ocean and to dodge predators as soon as she is out of this egg. Life begins as a battle, and you need to gain your strength right away. And the fowl is having to be on 4 feet and to start walking and running from day one to keep up. And if it doesn't, the risk of death is imminent. So the natural selection means that we need to develop our willpower, our will to live, and to develop strategies, strength. And we are bombarded, as soon as we incarnate, we are bombarded with risks, the risk of death. We lose our innocence, but in the womb, we could afford to be innocent, just like, again, a fetus. We are part of the original, the timeless realm. Passive bliss. There is no need for an ego in the womb. The ego becomes necessary once we are born. So as we are born, we need to develop an ego because the ego will help us strategize, defend ourselves. We will develop the self-preservation instincts, and we will develop a purpose. But we are shocked into this reality. Imagine being in the peaceful, loving, all-encompassing space of the womb, and the thrust into incarnation, separation, means nothing can be taken for granted. We still have oxygen provided, light provided, food provided, but everything requires work. And we need to constantly refuel. If we don't have nutrients, we fade. And that requires constant work. The risk of not measuring up, of not developing our will, of not finding food is discomfort. If we stay too long under the sun, we get sunburn. If we stay too long under the water, we get a cold. So we're constantly having to figure things out at the risk of discomfort, pain, disease, and death. We learn that resources are not endless, especially now with 8 billion people on the planet. We've developed a lot of strategies to find food, to grow food, but we are overexploiting our resources. Even back in the days when there weren't as many beings on the planet, the competition over resources meant that if we are not strong enough to figure things out, we will get, the poor share of the meal. If the breadcrumbs, if they even remain. So that concept of, yes, there are resources, but I have to work for them. And if I don't develop my skills, I will not have a meal. If I don't learn to hunt, if I don't learn to grow my food, there's not enough in the harvest necessarily to feed everyone. Sometimes there is, many times there isn't. And then we have seasons, right? Nothing grows in the winter. What are we going to do? Nothing grows in cold climates. Even the food sources are hibernating and scarce. So what the second stage is that not only do we need to find resources, but we become a resource. We can become a meal. So if we don't develop our willpower, our ego, our ability to defend and provide and stabilize, we will be consumed by those who have a stronger will. So we are in this mentality of eat or be eaten. So it doesn't matter if you are a vegan or a carnivore. Just the fact that there are many carnivorous beings on this planet and that death feeds life, even through composting. When a dead organism is composting, it provides life for nature. So regardless of your choice of diet, food implies killing. And whether you kill a vegetable or whether you kill an animal, it provides nutrients. Whether you are killed to feed someone else. This means that everyone becomes dangerous. Everyone could become a predator. And there are predators for food, but there are also predators for resources. If we stay negligent, if we're not alert, the opportunistic scavenger, the parasite, the predators will find us because they will not let, an energy, a source of energy pass them by. So the development of your immunity to recognize danger, to develop self-preservation instinct, means that you have to develop fear, caution, avoidance, self-defense, offense, aggression, and that you learn that you cannot trust blindly. These are the growing pains of having an ego. It's the hardest thing that could be. The descent means developing your consciousness, your ego, is an intensely demanding, risky business. But the struggle of survival make us more intelligent. As we develop strategies, as we start to figure things out and develop our routines and stabilize and learn how to grow food and learn how to climb trees and learn how to figure out the seasons and learn to exchange, this basically builds brain connections, dendrites. And you start to become a more capable, sophisticated human being. So through the shock of danger, the shock of survival, you learn to become stronger, but also more intelligent. And your intelligence is an intelligence to survive the day, an intelligence to stabilize and make sure that life is secure on a longer term, but also an intelligence to advance and to become more creative, to develop more tools and capacities, and to improve the quality of your life. So in the womb of the universe, we have this serenity. You see the lion sitting by the lamb, this idea of paradise. But this is not even accurate, because as much as there is serenity, there are still separation. Humans are separate from lions, and lions are separate from lambs, and water is separate from vegetation and so forth. So this is just a partial understanding of what the womb of the universe is. If you were to depict an image of the womb of the universe, it would be emptiness. And that emptiness would mean everything is included and formless. But just for the sake of understanding the ascension versus the descent, what I want to highlight is this: the womb of the universe implies that we are descending from a place of serenity and calm and peace and love and no danger into fear, pain, suffering, and the risk of death. And every entity develops a defense mechanism. And you see this rose is encapsulating this so powerfully, because the rose is so fragrant, so beautiful, but it is thorny. And it will make you bleed if you try to hold it and you don't have protection. And so the rose is not inviting you to cut it. And the animals develop horns and bites and teeth and claws to defend themselves. So we don't trust each other anymore, because we know we could become each other's meal. And the divine purpose is to develop our ego so that we can independently support our existence. And if it's not thorns, then it's going to be poison. Whether, the plants will fend off animals through poison and toxic, or the reptiles and scorpions and whatnot will develop poison. But even poison is a life force. In other words, we all develop an immune system. So in the book on Neptune, as we go through this process of understanding the 12th house, understanding the placements of Neptune and planets in the 12th house, we go through these 7 phases, starting with, still being connected to the innocence of the womb and thinking, well, it's the same. I'm born, but everything is provided, and we're all good, and we can trust each other. So there's no defense mechanism. It's naive. Then we are taken advantage of, and people steal from us, and they bite us, and our immunity weakens because we don't have an awareness of danger, and we are shocked into having to develop willpower, defense, preparation. Then self-preservation kicks in, where we say, hey, no more, stay off, boundaries, this is mine, this is yours, ask for permission, or I'm not letting you in. So this is all the descent, as we are shocked into existence, forced to develop an immune system, and the growing pain of having an ego. And once we develop our ego, we can stabilize, we can have purpose, and we can make sure that our family, our species is able to survive and perhaps thrive. And as we develop our ego, we start to understand that we don't need to fear as much, because here we have capacities, we're smart, things that were so different from us. You know, we were afraid of strangers. We were afraid of people who looked different from us. We were afraid of animals. We were afraid of, people with different skin colors, because everything is a potential threat. But over time, you start to see that it's not black and white, that not everything is against you, and that you can actually exchange energies. You can actually exchange goods. And so as you develop your ego, you also develop more awareness. And then you learn that your survival in the material world, in time and space, is not the ultimate reason for your life. And you go through the humbling of the ego to remember that you have a spiritual identity, and that everything that separated you is part of the same divine plan. So you are now in the process of re-engaging with your spiritual identity. Humbling your ego means that you realize it's not all about you, that it's not all about immediate gain, that there is a higher spiritual purpose that governs life as a whole. There is a truth for everyone. And if you know that, you can live better. So the process of ascension and reconnecting to your spiritual self means that you are also understanding that your spiritual development is part of survival. And then you can connect heaven with earth. So the struggles are obvious. From the lightness of spiritual being, you descend into form, into the density, and you have to forego your innocence, and you need to now start thinking. From a carefree approach, naive, blindly trusting, to the shock of danger. All these are captured in our placement of Neptune. Wherever you have Neptune in your chart, whatever planet is in your 12th house, you go through these phases where you are carefree, and then you're shocked into the descent. So, that's explained each chapter, how each position will experience that. From unity to competition, and from unity to adversity, where you risk being preyed upon, you risk being eaten. And I mean that not only physically, literally, but also emotionally. that if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't put your boundaries, people will take advantage of you. They will take advantage of your resources. They will drain you. Why? Not because they're mean per se, but because nothing can be wasted. And if you're wasting your wealth, if you're wasting your life source, someone else will make use of it. So the descent is a traumatic experience, and we're all experiencing to some degree post-traumatic stress because of this shock into incarnation. Because self-preservation means that we can ultimately only rely on ourselves. Even if we have a family and a tribe, they will perhaps help us to some degree, but no one can walk for us. No one can eat for us. No one can think for us. We need to do that alone. We need to develop the skills to survive on our own. So there is no place in nature for those who wish to remain innocent. You develop an immunity, then stability, then creativity. Every day you need to find food. As we mentioned, death serves life. And finding food in itself makes you smarter. Think of Taurus, then Gemini. From trust to fear. You need to be cautious. You need to have a healthy dosage of fear to prevent overexposure to danger, to know that you need to find shelter in a storm. You need to hide if there's a predator. You need fear to survive. And then from fear, you learn to command your life. So the descent into incarnation is a traumatic event where we are all shocked into the safety, from the safety of the womb to the reality where nothing can be taken for granted. For many of us, this means to a degree or another, we are suffering from post-traumatic stress from the very fact that we have incarnated. We have anxiety because we lost trust. We are angry because of so much injustice and witnessing the loss of innocence. And we are frustrating because we know there's more to life than this. And when we are in the thick of survival, we know somewhere that there is unconditional love, that there is a place of peace, that there is more to life than this. And yet we can't have it right away. We're frustrated into those limitations. All of us are torn between this rose, seeing the majestic beauty of nature, but how cruel and uncompromising it can be. And it forces us into caution and defense, where innocence cannot subsist. How cute. How beautiful. Baby, furry. But this is also the reality. Death, to live, and even the predator needs to be careful not to become prey. We learn to be ahead of the game, because if we don't, if we give up, you see how nature will reclaim us. Anything that is abandoned is going to be reclaimed. The same with us. If we give up, if we don't keep our flame, our ignition, our Aries burning, our Mars burning, Neptune will reclaim us. So Neptune is traumatized by the fact that, oh my God, this is so harsh, it's so mean, it's so thorny, there's so much suffering, there's so much disease. And our spiritual leader will say, don't be attached, overcome. Don't be seduced by pleasures. Don't, see the bigger picture. Transcend, because this time and space reality is an illusion. Your ego is an illusion. We are all one. And yet we are here. And when we feel pain, it's not an illusion. It's actually an experience. So Neptune, on the one hand, represents our shock into this and the trauma of existence, of incarnation. But it also reminds us of the higher reality. So we don't lose sight, even when we are in the thick of a storm. We can remember that there is love, that peace can be found, and that there is justice. So when you see injustice, you know that you can fight for justice. So Neptune gives you the reason why you are fighting, the reason why the struggle is worth it. So in a way, your ascendant between the 12th house and the first house speaks about how you need to be in the battle, but you need to also remember the higher reason why you are in the battle. And to understand that through consciousness, you can bring heaven down to earth. So where does compassion come in this greater scheme of things, in this descent and ascension? First of all, to understand that the descent is extremely challenging, and existence on this plane is extremely difficult for everyone and everything. It takes a lot of effort to survive, to thrive, but to even stay sane. So we did not ask to compete, to have to kill for food, to develop an ego. Did we really have a choice? Who created us? Who created this reality? Life thrust us into it. And that is not to say that, we can be abusive and say, well, life made me do it, and reject the responsibility of our actions. But to some degree, there is an understanding that we make a lot of mistakes because we live in a reality of extreme confusion between the innocence and the loss of innocence. So, of course, we are responsible for our actions, but we need to understand the context, and that also brings an element of acknowledgement and forgiveness in the big picture. We are made to lose our innocence, to become conscious being. That's part of the divine plan. So losing our innocence is going to have a traumatic effect. And we're all in it. We can forgive God for this necessary struggle, for what we are put through. Again, if it was up for us, we would stay in innocence in the womb. But it is by necessity, evolutionary necessity, through the divine plan set in motion, that we need to relinquish our innocence to become conscious being. And for that, there is a gesture of forgiving the pain we have to go through. Most of us would choose peace over war, or sharing our resources over competing for them. Having an ego is a struggle. It's a responsibility, and it's a paradox. But that we are pushed to learn self-preservation, to use our elbows, because that is part of us learning to promote life, to support ourselves. Once we have established that, we can become more generous and more inclusive, more aware. But as we said, sometimes the necessity of a battle is part of the descent. As we develop our skills, we develop the intelligence to survive and the intelligence to be well. We are, again, subject to the same struggles, to different levels of intensity. We are on the same boat. So whether we see excesses, whether we see scarcity, failures and success, there's a lot of vulnerability in all that, because we all had to lose our innocence to be successful, to try new things, to step out of our comfort zone, and to risk failure. We, of course, would all rather be in spirit. So when we say, well, or you will be rewarded in the spiritual world, how about existing here and now, accepting the challenge of incarnation? Stop fighting life and forgive God for the descent, the friction, and the suffering that comes with it. Forgive God for the loss of our innocence. We are all traumatized by the descent, whether we know it or not. Walking through the shadows can help us find the freedom from the shadows. Whenever we are facing a wall or in despair, we can try to remember there is a higher truth, and that ultimately it is benevolent, even if at the moment it seems so unfair, unjust, and just painful. Whether we need to fight to make a living, to struggle for our goals, let's do it with the intention to serve life and truth. So if you feel inspired, if you need more clarity, obviously, there is place for private consultations. And as you see these hands reaching high into the sky, ascending to the stars, astrology is one of the beautiful systems that brings heaven down to earth, that brings higher wisdom into everyday material reality. And understanding our natal chart help us understand the time we're in, the sequence of our incarnation. So that is perhaps a healthy step into this integration of the descent and the ascension. Thank you, everyone. I hope this gives some food for thought. Blessings.